Greetings folks, welcome to the world's first review of the Asus TUF 506 and the world's first in-depth information on the new Ryzen 4800H mobile CPU. Now this review was sponsored by my wallet, and in times like this was not a smart decision, but I've been working on YouTube very hard for the last 3 years and my 26,000 subscribers only brings in right now just under $300 a month on Google. So it's going to take subscribers a large amount in order for me to convince the manufacturers to send me laptops for review so I don't have to go out and spend $1,200+ on my own. You see, Google at this point is going to take me 5 to 7 months in order to be able to pay for a laptop like this, and that's just unfair for such a damn good review that you're about to see. Are you ready? Enjoy. This Asus TUF 506 is mostly plastic with an aluminum lid. It weighs in at 4.8 pounds and is just over 1 inch thick. The star of the show is the Ryzen 4800H. This is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU with a 45-watt TDP. I have seen this go as high as 61, nearly 62 watts. More evidence of that shortly. The graphics card inside this chassis is the GTX 1660 Ti with an 80-watt VBIOS. For memory, we have 2 8GB sticks of DDR4 at 3200 MHz. This is the slow cast latency 22 stuff here. Nonetheless, very nice to see this fast in memory. Moving forward, I would like to see this on both AMD and Intel platforms. Make it so, people. For storage, we have 2 NVMe drives. On this particular unit, one of those is occupied with a 1TB Intel NVMe. Pretty quick read writes on that as well. Now you can have an optional 2.5-inch drive, and doing so will give you a 48 watt-hour battery, and that's what we have in this particular unit. Now if you forego that and you're able to go with the 90 watt-hour battery, then of course that 2.5-inch drive will be gone. But with this unit being a 48 watt-hour machine, we were only able to get 2.5 to 3 hours of realistic use here. Of course not gaming, 90 watt-hours, expect to double that. The network interface card is a Realtek 8822CE. I would have liked to have seen just about anything but this in here as far as modern NICs go, but it is what it is. This is what we've got. The hinge is a little tight, so you will get chassis lift when opening up the display, and that display is a Full HD IPS 144Hz adaptive sync panel. Unfortunately, the color gamut's pretty poor at 65% standard RGB, 49% Adobe RGB at 284 nits. However, that power supply is really nice and small, very compact, and I do appreciate this design aesthetic. Two things. First being the power supply. 180 watt brick for the 1660 Ti unit, and I love how small this is. However, the specs on the 2060 model showcase a 230 watt brick. Now to me this doesn't make any sense. It shows a little bit of incompetence. I'm sorry Asus, but the VBIOS on the 1660 Ti and your 2060 is likely both 80 watts. In best case scenario, your 2060 has a 90 watt VBIOS. No way ever would any of those two laptops need a 230 watt brick if this one's getting by just fine on a 180 watt solution. So hopefully figure that out. I'd rather you ship this anyway. There was no way, shape, or form that I ever needed any more wattage than this based on how this laptop was functioning, and I think you did a good job. There's just no need to hold that extra 50 watts for ransom when it's just not necessary for either versions of that laptop. So perhaps you can prove me wrong there. Now, when it comes to the display, folks, it's not the color gamut that is the issue. It is just the overall, response time and lagginess. I've never played on a 144 Hz or 120 Hz display before in my life that felt like I was still using 60 Hz. It did not feel well, and I can promise you it will be the #1 reason why people return this laptop, because on paper, the specs on this machine are some of the best that I have ever seen. So let's move up from there. What about that webcam? The 720p webcam and microphone are located at the top of the bezel. They look and sound like this. Keyboard strokes are picked up just like so. Pretty quiet, relatively speaking. I could definitely use this personally. I've seen better, but I've definitely seen worse. On to the benchmarks. Firestrike. Man, that physics score is silly at over 21,000 points. Time Spy. Love it, the physics score there, over 8,300 points. Cinebench 20, 4,100 plus points on multiple runs. That was a really impressive score, easily up there with an i9. As a matter of fact, oftentimes it would take the 9880H some undervolting in order to acquire a score that good, and of course this is bone stock. Now, Cinebench 15, 1800 points on that, no complaints there. As you can see, we are on BIOS 302. We have some ambient temperature fluctuations between 70 and 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are always running that turbo profile for our benchmarks and gaming. Now, what that looks like in a real run here with Cinebench 20, now you can see that 45 watt TDP of the CPU is not quite honored here, and it will run all the way up to almost 62 watts. Now, because the CPU has the whole entire heatsink to itself, you won't see the temperatures get too high. However, there are some instances when gaming where you will actually see that CPU hit 100 degrees Celsius. More on that shortly. Now, when it comes to the 1660 Ti in this chassis, I know, who cares, right? But it never did hit 80 degrees Celsius, and this chassis had no problem cooling that. So let's move on to the 4800H. Generally speaking, it was pulling around that 20 to 26 watts across most CPU-intensive titles, and the temperature would typically hang out at around 80 degrees Celsius. Now, here's the thing when it comes to this CPU. Well, a 6-core 12-thread CPU rarely has any bottlenecking issues when it comes to the thread count, and on the Ryzen 4800H, 8 cores, 16 threads, I mean, geez, this definition of future-proofing here, and all of this inside of a $1,200 package is so promising for the future, and I love that. So by no means will you have any bottlenecking, considering the instructions per clock on this CPU is right up there with some of Intel's finest, and ultimately what we've got here is a really great solution. But when it comes to the thermal performance, I will find certain instances where this will get into the mid-90s all the way up to 100 degrees Celsius before, and it'll do it in the strangest times. Sometimes it's in the loading screen, every once in a while it will be in a game. Now, since this is a new CPU to market, I'm going to need some more time with this across several different devices before I can really see what's going on here, but just a heads up, this tends to run a little bit cooler than the Intel solution without it thermal throttling most of the time. We do have the rare instances where it will get up to near 100 degrees Celsius, but ultimately what you're seeing here for the most part is going to be what you get for a worst case scenario, and I'm pretty happy with that. Port selection on the left-hand side features our barrel power port. We have the LAN port with the tab up, very nice on thinner laptops, a single HDMI, two USB 3.1s, we have a single USB-C for data and display port, and a combo mic and headphone port. On the right, we have a single USB 3.1, some more GPU exhaust, and a lock. And in the rear, we have nothing but exhaust featuring that copper fin array. Oh, this looks so nice. The trackpad is small, but is smooth as glass, uses Windows Precision drivers. We do have dedicated buttons here. They're not too squishy, and they overall do feel quite nice. The last few Asus laptops I reviewed, I enjoyed the keyboard, and this one is no different. It does feature a numeric pad, and it sounds like this. The Armory Crate software is as aesthetically pleasing as it has ever been, and from here you can control the silent performance and turbo profiles by clicking them manually, or you can press the FN F5 key for the shortcut. Other than that, not a whole lot of options in here, especially when it comes to RGB, as there is just a single zone across the whole entire keyboard. The BIOS too is very aesthetically pleasing, but there's nothing here to wow us with any options being able to modify on what is traditionally a pretty well locked down laptop. On paper, this is a very likable laptop, and there's no way on earth, aside from a very lucky used market, you will ever find an 8-core 16-thread i9 mobile processor from Intel inside of a laptop for $1,200 new, let alone used. And I think this is an awesome value on paper. I love the fact that we have 3200 megahertz memory. Despite it having some pretty slow cast latency, I really don't think that's as big of a deal as some may make it out to be. But it's the display, and this is a very important thing here, folks. The display is something you are going to stare at. It is one of the most important aspects of a gaming laptop, especially considering the very nice IPS 100% standard RGB 3 millisecond response times we have on other displays. It's not the color gamut, it's the overall ghosting and input lags that makes this very difficult to enjoy. When it comes to the build quality of the device, it's still a $1,200 TUF Asus gaming laptop, but at least it actually looks really nice now. This particular design aesthetic for what this laptop is, I think is very nice. Yes, we're missing the macro keys above the keyboard. Is that a deal breaker? Maybe it is to you. It really wasn't for me. Was disappointed to see those go. I like the port placement. Overall, here's where I'm at on this laptop. You could go and spend $1,100 on a Helios 300 and an extra $100 on a terabyte of storage, and now you will probably have a more enjoyable just sitting down on your desk gaming experience. The build quality of the Helios is better, and the display is much more enjoyable to use. But you just can't deny the 4800H. It is spectacular, but at the end of the day, you're not looking at the CPU, you're looking at the display. You're trying to enjoy a gaming laptop, and again, I think a lot of people are going to be returning this device because of the display, and it is a shame, because on paper, this is some of the best specs you can have for $1,200. Man, and I love that CPU. All right, folks. Like this if you liked it. Please subscribe. It's really going to help out the channel. I'm Bob of All Trades, and this was my in-depth review of the Asus TUF 506 featuring the Ryzen 4800H. And I'll see you in the next video. Oh yeah, and the teardown tutorial on this laptop, linked in the description below and right here. Peace.